Paul Monaghan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to this budget debate as the Scottish National Party member for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross. As my honourable friend has suggested, history is important, Madam Deputy Speaker. We can learn much from studying the social and economic conditions of the past, and my constituency holds many lessons that are relevant today, for I represent that part of Scotland that endured the clearances. Indeed, it would be remiss of me today, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I did not begin by paying tribute to the remarkable families and the crofters that lost their livelihoods, their homes and their lives during that shameful period of history. The clearances were perpetrated during the 18th and 19th centuries, when Highlanders were forced from land they had held for generations. The clearances shifted land use from farming to sheep raising because sheep were considered more valuable than people. And in the process, a way of life was exterminated to further the financial ambitions of aristocratic landowners. The evictions that took place are remembered for their brutality and for the abruptness of the social change they prompted. At the time, Madam Deputy Speaker, this Parliament compounded the inequity by implementing legislation to prohibit the use of the Gaelic language, the playing of bagpipes and even the wearing of tartan. The cumulative effect devastated the cultural landscape of the counties that I represent today, and the resulting impact destroyed much of Scotland's Gaelic culture. This Parliament's policy ultimately failed, Madam Deputy Speaker, although I suspect the Chagos Islanders will recognise this account today. In those dark days, Madam Deputy Speaker, the cries and pleas of innocent families were simply ignored. If they were lucky, those families were dragged screaming from their homes, evicted and left to face destitution. If they were unlucky, their homes were simply set alight as they sat within. The clearances forced the migration of Highlanders to the sea coast, the Scottish lowlands and further afield to the new worlds of North America and Australasia. Today, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are more descendants of Highlanders found in these diaspora nations than in Scotland itself. These dispossessed Highlanders travelled the world and applied their creativity and resource in ways that have benefited all of humankind. In fact, the economic and social contribution of the ancestors of people from my constituency stand today as a shining example of why the free movement of people is something no government should hesitate to encourage. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we debate the government's budget, it is unfortunate that the cries and pleas of many people in my constituency continue to be ignored. Whereas in history the people of the Highlands were burned out of their homes so others could profit from sheep, the beneficiary of this budget will be the financial markets that continue to take precedence over people. The impact will be that vulnerable people will face impoverishment due to lack of economic opportunity, low wages, Europe's lowest pensions, further experimentation with that failed system we know as universal credit, the erosion of working tax credits and, frankly, the stifling lack of imagination that is self-evident in the austerity these measures promote, and that has raised the UK up to be the fourth most unequal society in the developed world in terms of wealth inequality. For many in my constituency, past and present, the hardship, misery and impoverishment that accompany this inequality are the only consequences of the government's long-term economic plan that has been over 300 years in the making. Madam Deputy Speaker, while some here today pray of economic laws, I choose to highlight that many of our fellows are starving. It is time we recognise that economic laws are made not by nature but by human beings, These laws are chosen for implementation by human beings, and their effect will now be felt by human beings. A further £12 billion of cuts, accompanied by a punitive sanction regime, will do nothing except ensure the Geely peace, of which my honourable friend from Glasgow South spoke previously in his maiden speech, will remain a significant feature of childhood for far too many of our children. Until 8th of May, Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituency was a Liberal stronghold. As long ago as 1918, the seat of Caithness in Sutherland was held by Sir Robert Leicester Harmsworth, Baronet of Murray Lodge in the Royal Borough of Kensington. I don't think he was a local. Later, the seat was held for many years by Robert MacLennan, who sits now as Baron MacLennan of Rogart, just a short walk away. And more recently by the 3rd Viscount Thurso, John Archibald Sinclair, the 5th generation of the Sinclair family to represent Caithness in this Parliament. I pay tribute to Lord Thurso. In the last few weeks, I have learned he was a popular member of the establishment here at Westminster, and I wish him well for the future. I have lived in the Highlands of Scotland for the greater part of my life, and I can confirm today, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross is one of the very largest parliamentary constituencies by area, and despite what many of my colleagues will claim, it is easily the most beautiful. Spectacularly so. It is a great honour for me to represent a Highland seat in this Parliament, Madam Deputy Speaker. It seems clear to me that in my constituency at least, few ordinary people have had that privilege. Madam Deputy Speaker, beautiful as my constituency is, it is subject to great acts of vandalism. Cape Wrath is the only site in Europe where live £1,000 bombs are dropped. The bombing is enormously destructive to fragile wildlife and excludes communities from the proximity for up to 120 days each year. Similarly, Scotland's oldest royal borough, Tain, is tormented by fast-flying jets, flying as low as 150 feet to drop £1,000 concrete bombs just a few miles from housing estates and primary schools. It is instructive, Madam Deputy Speaker, that while many of my constituents work tirelessly to protect our marine animals, our rivers, our wildlife and our environment, this government considers it acceptable to bomb the land we consider precious. I say instructive, Madam Deputy Speaker, because this seems to be the manifestation of the one nation ideal that my honourable friends and I are expected to be impressed by, but from which communities in my constituency derive only disadvantage. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have spent much of my adult life in the voluntary sector, working with those truly challenged by the UK government's long-term economic plan. Today, like others, my family and I pay the punitive electricity charges and excessive carriage charges that this government imposes. We are exposed to the reform of rural fuel duties that have brought a new and vital meaning to the world failure. My communities prepare for the disastrous repercussions of the recent announcement to close 3 Royal Bank of Scotland branches in our rural areas. And our businesses endure the iniquitous transmission charging regime maintained by this government, which acts today as the main obstacle to securing energy supplies and wealth for Scotland. We are used to empty promises, Madam Deputy Speaker, but you should know that in the early days of this Parliament, Scotland has chosen to watch as promises of as close to a federal state as possible, where all the options of devolution are there and are possible, are being publicly erased from the Scotland Bill. They know that for many this budget visits hardship on disadvantage. Madam Deputy Speaker, like my honourable friend from Inverclyde, I grew up fascinated and inspired not just by the technological achievements of Project Apollo, but by the social achievements of the civil rights movement. As a child, I learned of the bravery of Rosa Parks and how she changed the world. And as an adult, I learned of the personal challenges met and overcome, and of the uncommon political imagination of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In these individuals, I found examples of not only bravery, but of imagination, the imagination to perceive the benefit of change in a world that aspires to achieve, not receive. Many of those that supported me on the 7th of May did so in the belief that it is now time to achieve. And their uncommon political imagination sits around me today. Our aim is to achieve the right to build a fairer Scotland. Our aim is to establish a state of affairs where our old, our disadvantaged, and our vulnerable are valued, and where our poor are protected, not punished. I made the decision to stand for election to this Parliament knowing, as Mrs Parks did, that I had the strength of my ancestors with me. And I know, Madam Deputy Speaker, as you do, that all are equal. Indeed, I stand today knowing, as Mr Roosevelt did, that the test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, it is whether we provide enough for those who have little. And in that task, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will not be found wanting. For like Roosevelt, we are going to make a country in which no one is left out.
Okay, before I call the next speaker.